Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to everyone to the LBGT Plus panel with alums. So my name is Guadalupe Hayes-Mota, and I am the co-president for BGLATA, which is the MIT LBGT Alumni Association. And today we're going to go through the panel to get different perspective from different points of view from our alums. And the way that it'll be structured for this is first, we will do some introductions of individuals, then we'll go through some questions that we have prepped for us, and then afterwards, for about 15 minutes, we'll go through Q&A. So if you are ready, you can write down questions into the screen, and we will read them through them and answer as many as we can. Also today, I want to say that we try to include as many different perspectives as possible from different points of view, but we were not able to include everyone, right? So I think we're trying to represent as many voices and opinions for this. So let's get started. So do you wanna start, Hal? I'll give you an introduction about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Hal. I'm a class of 2015 undergrad alum. I did my degree in course 14 and 15, and if you're too far away and don't remember what those are, that's economics and management science. After graduating, I went to work for Capital One, and that kind of kicked my sort of technology career off in a product management role. And kind of the more I was involved in that, the more I realized I didn't want to manage products. I wanted to actually build them. And so I am currently a software engineer at a startup in New York. Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent intro. And then, I'm looking forward to all the questions.
Well, thank you for that. Next, I'll introduce Claire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Clare Bayley. I was at MIT from 2006 to 2012-ish. I majored in computer science and minored in women's and gender studies. I did kind of the opposite thing that Hal just mentioned he did. I majored in computer science, but very quickly realized that I wanted to interact with people more than machines in my everyday life. So I went briefly to a programming job to make some money in San Francisco, transitioned from that to running business intelligence for Kink.com. Then I was at Google for 4 years in the developer relations department, bounced around a lot, eventually landed in a kind of product management leadership typey role. And now I work for the government. So I am the now outgoing, but still here, director of product for the US Digital Service. I'm in Baltimore now, we're based in DC. And it's a pretty interesting time to have an inside view of the executive branch. I can say that much.
I can imagine that given the time that we are. Would you like to talk a little about yourselves, Andre?
Yes, thanks, Guadalupe. I am Andre Green, class of 2008, course 7, which is biology. So I graduated with Guadalupe. Right after undergrad, I went to Harvard for graduate school in the molecular and cellular bio department. And bio at MIT is basically molecular biochemistry, but I actually joined an evolutionary biology lab to kind of broaden my perspective a little bit. And I've kind of been finding myself continuing to do that because then I did a postdoc in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Chicago, and I started studying monarch butterflies there, and that's what I currently still do. I'm an assistant professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, although I live in Detroit, and I'm kind of basically interested in the genetic and environmental basis of how monarch butterflies are able to perform their annual migration. And I just started a couple months ago. So it's been a really interesting ride for a few different ways so far for the past few months, but looking forward to the further discussion that we'll have today.
Thank you for that. You want to talk a little bit about yourself, Melva?
Hi, everybody. My name is Melva James. I'm currently an internal consultant at Initio Software, which is based in Lexington, Mass. I have done a lot of different things academically. Born and raised in Mississippi. I did my Bachelor of Science in Chemistry at Ole Miss, which is University of Mississippi. Then I went to MIT and did a PhD program in course 5. I decided it wasn't for me. Earned my master's from that program in 2007. And then was out of school for a couple of years and jumped ship into computer science. Did my PhD in human-centered computing at Clemson University in South Carolina. Then I ended up coming back to MIT to work for MIT Lincoln Laboratory. And I was there for about 4 years doing primarily cybersecurity research. I think it's a wonderful thing that I have an opportunity to come back and talk to people.
Thank you, Melva. And would you like to introduce yourself, Andy?
Sure, great. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm Andy Rubinson, pronouns are he, him, his. And I started out my career, I've done some changes along the way, but I started as a rocket scientist, studied aerospace engineering at University of Michigan, and I actually worked for my first 10 years out of school for the Department of Defense, the US Air Force, before I did a couple year stint in consulting with what's now Accenture. And then I, post Accenture, went to MIT, where I got my MBA, so course 15 in '02. And from there, I shifted into software. I actually did consulting and then became part of product marketing for a company called Ariba, which does procurement software, so helps companies buy things. I left there after about 4 years, and I did a 4-year stint with Akamai, which folks from MIT may have heard of. And then I actually came back to Ariba 4 years later, and at the time they were in the process of being acquired by SAP, which is the large German software company. And so I'm now part of the SAP Ariba solution management team. And I'm also the co-lead of our North American Pride at SAP employee network group, or employee resource group, depending on which acronym you like to use. I was also a past board member of the BGLATA group that we're here with today, as well as have been active in the local HRC Human Rights Campaign, New England Board of Governors, and steering committee. So that's me.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Christine, you want to talk a little about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Guadalupe, and thanks also for the opportunity. I think it's always interesting to hear people's different career paths and journeys. So I'm Christine Tai. I am currently an associate director of the device and packaging development functions at a small biotech in San Diego. I started off being a mechanical engineer, course 2, with a minor in biomedical engineering back in '03. That was back when biomedical engineering was not yet a major. So it was a field that was of interest to me, but not necessarily such a big deal yet. And starting off, I worked at Ford Motor Company as a product development engineer in the rotational program. And while it was a very good technical experience, I got to see the full life cycle of the product development process, the design, testing, robustness, manufacturing, launch aspects of things. And they also had support groups. I just felt that from both a cultural and LGBT perspective, I just never felt like I belonged there. And so with that perspective, it propelled me and motivated me to get my master's. And I received my master's in bioengineering, the area that I wanted to go into in San Diego. And I found that it was a way to transition into the biotech industry. I also found that the society and the environment here was a bit more assimilated, and I felt like it was a reflection of myself. And what I found in working at Phoenix and in San Diego, there's a transition process as you go and develop not only your career, but also yourself in terms of how you navigate your coworkers, your boss, your work situation. It really provides, it really requires some transition period as you grow your confidence in order to be where I am today. And so I hope to share that experience with you through the questions that we have today for you.
Well, thank you for everyone for introducing themselves. Let's get into the questions and hear more of your perspectives about how has been your career path. So so the first question I have is, how has being LBGTQ plus impacted or shaped your career? And you can talk about how has this facilitated or hindered opportunities and those components. What do you think about that, Christine?
You know, that I always thought that this was such an interesting question, because I think it's tied to really how you present yourself. On a subconscious level, people make split-second judgments about your trustworthiness, how dependable you are, if you're kind or not, just in that quick sort of viewpoint of yourself. And I presented very differently when I was younger. I mean, as a young LGBTQIA person, I thought that in order to find others like myself, I had to present more masculine because I was a tomboy. You know, that was kind of the usual kid logic. And I thought that in order to be seen and recognized, that was how I had to be. And, you know, not to dive too deep into the exploration of one's identity, suffices to say, it was at an extent where I thought that I might want to transition. So you can imagine, or maybe you can't, because I looked so different. I just had very short hair, Asian features, and of course everyone thought I was a 12-year-old boy. So starting off in my career, it was a bit detrimental because people saw me as a young child, not as a professional engineer. But on the flip side of things, that situation and that environment in as I started off in my career in the Midwest, it did make me that much more determined to make a change in my career quickly. And, you know, it propelled me to seek different opportunities. With respect to the industry choice, you know, I've always wanted to be in the healthcare and the biotech industry. I've always been passionate about science and engineering, product development, and everyone has many sides to themselves. And in the process of navigating a career, you're trying to balance all these different parts of yourself. So I think, you know, for me, the experiences that I've had as an LGBT plus person, it didn't change my passion for science and engineering. It just drove a more determined pursuit of what I wanted. So
Thank you for that.
In that way, it was just a motivator rather than a change in what I wanted to do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's powerful to hear that, how that motivated you. How's your experience, Andy, with regard to this question?
Sure. So, I mean, I definitely have had a varied experience throughout my career. So I mentioned that I started my career out of college working for the Department of Defense. And I remember because my very first day of work was, I think, the first ever National Coming Out Day. So it was October 11th, but here I am going to work for the Department of Defense. At the time, you could be fired for being gay. So it was definitely a concern of mine. Basically, I wouldn't be able to hold a security clearance and wouldn't be able to keep my job. So it was a very tense situation for me about being who I really was, my authentic self. And ironically, I've literally just come out of the closet as I graduated from undergrad. So I had been out for maybe less than 6 months when I started my career. And so it was kind of like, I leapt out of the closet, I told all my friends and family, and then I ended up going back in when I started at work. But the nice thing about being there is that a lot of the people that I worked with, there was a strong contingent of younger, like other kids that had just come out, or young adults that had just come out of college. So I was able to make a lot of friends and kind of get a comfort level where I was able to come out and be myself, but I was kind of had to be very cautious. And I think I've carried that with me, or I had, at least in the initial parts of my career, And it was kind of a different age. This was in the late 80s, is different than in the late teens or early 20s that we're in today. So it's taken a while for me to kind of get more comfortable with being out at work, but I think that as my career has progressed, I've felt more and more comfortable to the point now where I am very upfront. I will actually mention the fact, that oh, my husband and I did this. And there were definitely back in the early days, I wouldn't have felt comfortable at all talking about that. And now I just do it kind of matter of fact. It's just like, hey, if everyone else can talk about what they did with their, the husband did with their wife, and what they did with their families or friends, it shouldn't be an issue for me. So it definitely, especially later in my career, as I've become more comfortable with myself, it's been much less of an issue, and I think a lot of it was driven by my own kind of mindset. So I don't know that if I had done it earlier, if I had talked about my orientation earlier, that it would have been a big deal. But I think we all have our own little voices in our head that are telling us what to do. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you for that. It just seems like you've gone through that journey and kind of changed over time for that. How about you, Hal? How's that been for you?
It's interesting to draw the contrast between like what Andy experienced, mainly because like he, the DoD aspect, I never experienced any of that. And I, having graduated 5 years ago, came into a very different world in terms of, now you have, when you go to a big company, especially like, I've been at several large corporations where not only is, being out something that is sometimes celebrated, sometimes a non-issue, but also you have a lot of these companies now going out of their way to actually like create affinity groups and, really making sure that you, as an LGBT person or any other affinity group beyond LGBT people, are feeling sort of safe and accepted, and like you are valued in your own identity. But I think it's interesting to also note that there's sometimes, a distinction between where some of that is just lip service because it's like they have to do it. If you're not doing it when everybody else is doing it, then is there something wrong with your company, and are you kind of trying to avoid it? So it's almost like a, check the box. We have this thing, and let's use it as a marketing thing. And I think one of my more recent experiences, even though it was like super subtle and not, I wouldn't describe it particularly as something that like hindered an opportunity in a great way. But like in my previous job, when I was at NASDAQ, there was a particular conference or something, software conference, that was being organized in an office that was in Sweden, I want to say. And, there were a number of people that were asked to go speak. And I wasn't, despite being sort of in a lead role in the software project that I was in charge of. And then when I spoke to my boss about it, and I didn't even bring it up because it didn't occur to me, he actually mentioned that like, oh yeah, they're a little bit weird over there. I'm wondering if the reason why you're asked is because, they know you're gay. And I thought that was really strange and something that, I hadn't experienced at that point, prior to that point, and didn't feel like it hadn't even registered in my radar. But once he said it, I was like, huh, I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. I never would have thought about it that way. So even when you have companies with affinity groups kind of, saying there are all these opportunities and we are so accepting and blah, 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 there's still these like cultural and small and subtle things that can creep in. And I think there's still some time until we, figure all those things out. And it kind of leads into a future question that I think we'll probably get to, which is like, how does it actually end up defining the way you progress in your career, whether it's conscious or subconscious? And I think that figures into it. So.
Thank you for that. It does make sense, like how that has impacted you in your career moving through it. How about Andre? How it's been for you in academia and your route through that?
And actually, I think that my particular experience may be able to touch on each of the three different perspectives that we've already heard. So I finished graduate school in 2014, so entering my postdoc and then now this professorship. I've always kind of chosen institutions and places where I could be out, and I was kind of leading with that. Just like I kind of lead in with being Black, but I don't have a choice about that. I mean, I lead in with being gay as well. So I've always purposefully placed myself in settings where I could work, I feel like, as comfortably as I possibly could. But as you know, I have, now that I'm starting a professorship, for instance, the course that I'm going to be teaching in a year is the Intro Genetics course. So there are going to be hundreds of students in this course. So now I'm starting to think about, well, whereas it used to be just me and this very kind of small group of people who are close to me and know me, now I have to think about how am I kind of projecting some type of confidence to these students, because I need to get them to listen to me in certain ways, respect me in certain ways, and I'm going to have a lot of different people kind of in the course. So now I do think a lot more about kind of my own presentation as kind of a gay man in front of them. And I mean, I have some ideas about how I think I want to approach that, but we're basically going to be waiting until kind of the first few days of the course to, because as a teacher, you're reading kind of what students are giving you, and just basically placing myself in a position where I can be most effective to them without giving up kind of too much of how I want to kind of do this job and why I kind of chose this particular job. So it has been kind of an evolution, maybe kind of even a backwards evolution. But overall, University of Michigan has been great about being out. I anticipate that the students largely that I've interacted with are incredibly open and enthusiastic. So yeah, we'll just kind of see kind of how things go.
Thank you. To highlight that evolution that you went through over time, right? So I'm going to jump into a different question now, and I want to get more perspective about the LBGT community itself. And so for this question, what I'm going to ask is, how do you find the LBGT plus community after college, and how did you perceive that? How was that experience for you, Melva?
This question actually makes me laugh a little bit because of the two ways you can read it. You know, I find it distant compared to school for sure. And I took for granted how school basically created my social life. And I've been in school for so long, you know, really just with the exception of like the past like 4.5 years, my whole life has been, you know, defined by my academic path. And so, you know, coming back to Boston and being a working professional living out in the suburbs as opposed to Cambridge, it is very, very different. And so I have found myself reliant on a combination of social network, you know, apps and things like Meetup and, you know, dating apps, and as well as just friends. Like a friend of mine introduced me to, there's like a butch-oriented club, Bay State Butches, and they meet up once a month. And so initially I was like, well, I don't know how I feel about, you know, identifying in this way. But it's turned out to be a very nice community. And also it's forced me to think about you know, how do I really identify myself? You know, I don't think I would have said, oh, I'm butch before. I don't think I would have said anything because I spent so much time, you know, trying not to draw too much attention to myself. And so it's been an interesting experience to try to work to be more visible and work to find more community. So yeah, it hasn't been easy, but you know, it's something that I'm, you know, committed to doing, you know, just for myself and for my quality of life.
That makes sense. How about you, Hal? How's it been for you?
It's been interesting, mainly because of sort of how my experiences have evolved over time. You know, one thing that was a little bit different for me was that when I was in college, I was still a little bit in that sort of like shame part of being a gay man, and kind of still internalized a lot of that. And as a result, you know, my general MO was kind of like, you know, I am almost proving to myself and everybody else like, oh, being gay is just an insignificant part of me, and it's like, you know, it just relates to a very specific set of things, and then everything else, like nothing else needs to be affected by it. So during those times, I personally found myself like almost fearing the idea of going to like the Rainbow Lounge, for example, where all I wanted to do was kind of just be incognito. And, you know, I think part of that was made bigger by the fact that like my background is, you know, I was born and raised in Turkey, which is a fairly conservative country. And you don't really get a lot of LGBT visibility. In college, I was in a fraternity, which is a very high testosterone, very straight macho culture environment. And so I think a lot of the college experience was kind of like, oh, well, this is just something I do on the side. Whereas once college ended, I think a bunch of things happened. Maybe it's just by virtue of me, you know, getting older and growing up. I don't know. But it was like I felt more comfortable, you know, doing things that previously I would have sort of censored myself from doing. So, you know, the question asked, I think the question you said was like community. And I think as far as community is concerned, after college, what I've found is it's, you know, especially if you're in a big city, like I'm in New York, the LGBT community, especially the gay community in around my age, tends to be very like, you know, hookup oriented, for the lack of a better way of describing it. But at the same time, if you actually go out and try to find it, like, for example, I've become a member of a sports league where it's a little bit more, you know, let's get to know each other and let's actually try to make an effort to be friends in this kind of low pressure environment. I think looking for and finding those opportunities, those little pockets, actually gave me the sense of like, oh, there are other people out there like me, and it's not just, you know, gay people are only for dating. It's actually I could be friends with them, I can share my life with them, and I can have conversations with them that I couldn't have with, you know, straight counterparts, where they might not understand the implications of certain things because they haven't gone through the same experiences. So I would say by and large, like the community aspect of being out after college has been pretty positive, but I think that probably also has to do with like where I am. Like, again, New York is a pretty good place to be gay. I don't know if that necessarily would apply to everybody everywhere else. So that's kind of what my experience has been like.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it's true, like every community, depends on where community you are or what city you are, can really impact that influence. I'm gonna move a little further back towards, again, the workplace. And this time I wanna talk about what, if you are out, what made you come out of the workplace and what factors influence you to do that? How is that for you, Claire?
So I really like this question. I am out, like I'm very out. And I mean that both in the sense of I've been kind of open about my sexuality since I went through puberty. And also I speak a lot more openly about other facets of my identity than a lot of other people do, right? Like I talk pretty openly and calmly about my struggles with mental health. I'm clean and sober as well. I've got a lot of fun different gender presentation things going, which obviously those are a little more obvious than some of the other things. But I say all this because I want to emphasize the importance of open authenticity at work. And this kind of ties into something Andre was saying earlier about the power of being visible, both to let other people know that you exist in this industry, right? It's like there are queer butch women in government, in computer science, and whatever. And also because I know there are others that aren't out, and I want to make sure that they can see someone pulling it off. I consider myself very lucky to never have had to worry about this issue. I moved to San Francisco after college, which helped me find my community pretty easily. And it's hard to be a non-gay accepting company in San Francisco. But, I'm not going to have a problem getting an interview. And sometimes I kind of have to sit back and I'm like, okay, what would it be like to be queer and interviewing for this job if I didn't have MIT on my resume? Because like, I got to be honest, that's a pretty big help. And it's one of the things that leads me to not have to worry about it. And so I acknowledge that I have that privilege, and it's really, really important to me to use it almost defiantly to be out in my workplace. The most pointed example I have of this is in my current job. Like I said, I work for the executive branch, and I distinctly remember my first time at a party full of government officials at which a few political appointees of this administration were there. And I was really nervous, and I debated for so long if I was going to go with a suit or a dress. Because I got plenty of both, and sometimes I'll wear either as the occasion strikes me, but it felt like a big moment. And I ended up wearing a suit, a very fitted custom suit, and just like preening around under odd looks from a lot of like the other people in suits that fit less well there. But it was definitely an act of defiance, and it's really important to me to do that.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit what Andre was talking about, how that has impacted. You want to elaborate a little more about that, Andre?
Yeah, I just had like 3 quick points to make. So I'm definitely kind of on the same wavelength as Claire in kind of wanting to kind of represent that model. And I feel like one of the things that I did was there's this list called 500 queer scientists that basically, you get to put up a short bio. And it's like one of my top 10 Google hits. So now basically anyone who works with me, who wants to work with me, any of that, if you decide to do a little Google sleuthing, like you'll know everything. And if I kind of lose an opportunity because of that, so be that. But I actually think that it'll probably lead to kind of additional opportunities, and particularly reaching folks who I kind of want to reach. Folks who maybe kind of would have been a little bit more reluctant to join an evolutionary biolab or kind of approach me about potentially working with me. So being able to kind of have that visibility, and what's kind of helped me with that is that my advisor was a queer woman, an awesome queer woman actually. And she really provided kind of an amazing model for kind of what being incredibly open, but incredibly supportive and incredibly well respected in kind of evolutionary bio can look like. So I've been kind of lucky to have her as a model and kind of trying to use that in the choices that I make in my career.
Yeah, for sure. I think people you work with really do have that influence and molds you to go and feel accepted. I think, and you talked a little bit about how that movement of coming out started from when you started after undergrad. Do you want to talk a little more about that and give more insights?
Yeah, so as I alluded to, or I mentioned previously, I have always come out at work, but I think how I've done that has changed. when I first came, especially with the DoD situation, it was always based on relationships with people. You know, when I got to know people, when I had created bonds, I felt it was important to me to be able to, you know, be my authentic self. I didn't want to like lie to people. I didn't want to make stuff up or sit and, you know, not say like, hey, I went out to, you know, the bars in West Hollywood, or, you know, whatever the case may be. It's like you want to be able to talk about your personal life, or even just not have to pretend that, you know, you're interested in a woman if you're not. So it had always been the case for me that as I got to know people, as I got to feel comfortable around them, that I, you know, came out to them. And you know, luckily I never had any sort of adverse reaction of both. When I was working for the Air Force, I also was working at another DoD facility down in Huntington Beach, California, where it was kind of multi-military groups. And, you know, I met people from different branches of the armed forces, and actually ironically, I was close friends with the people that were like closest my age at the time. I was in my late 20s at the time. And they were all military officers. So they were like lieutenants, you know, Air Force lieutenants or Army lieutenants and captains and things. So, and I came out with them because, again, they were kind of part of my social circle. That kind of changed when I was consulting. After I left the DoD, I was consulting, as I mentioned, with what became Accenture. And they had, I was probably a little more out there, but I remember that they were like looking at, some people were saying like, we want to form an employee resource group, like let's bring the LGBTQ folks together and have a group of folks. And I remember there was one of the partners that we asked that question at a big group meeting, and I think he was the head of like their diversity and inclusion group, and he was like, I just don't think we're ready for that yet. And ironically, that same organization today, I was at the Out and Equal conference last October in DC. You know, they're, you know, really big. Like they had a huge reception that they sponsored, and it's just, I think those types of things kind of take time sometimes, but it's glad that it's become so much more commonplace and accepted. And as I mentioned, now in my current environment, SAP has gotten a lot of awards for their, you know, diversity and inclusion recognition. I think they were in with the Fortune's top 50 diversity and inclusion companies and things like that. So it's a very different feeling now, so that I don't necessarily feel the need to be out, or I don't feel the need that I have to wait until like I get to know somebody really well. I'm much more comfortable just kind of mentioning like my husband, and basically outing myself to people. And also I think oftentimes there are people that already know. It's like, you know, word gets out or whatever. But I've just, again, really grateful that I haven't really had any negative impacts from it.
Thank you. Yeah, it changes with time, and I think that changes with also the companies, right? The companies start becoming more accepting, or start including people more and being more inclusive. Now, was that your experience, Christine, with this?
So I in some ways, I started my career in a very similar era as Andy did, and shared some of the experiences that I think Hal shared when he was talking about sort of that subtle, you know, sense of the fear of perhaps your career being stalled or postponed or delayed in some way because of your sexual orientation. And so for me, I'd come out to friends in college, but with, as you know, with the coming out process, it's an ever-going and ongoing process. And with every company that I interviewed with or looked at, I always looked at the company policy. And that's just one indication of where that company is going. You can see with what they've included within that company policy, how progressive they might be. But it's really the culture and the coworkers that are there. And so when you spend so much time with your coworkers, how they behave towards you, what their beliefs are, the little things that they say can really influence when and if you come out to them. And so I had the same sort of experience where as I got to know people, I would come out to them. But I'm finding that now with this current company, not only is it a very inclusive company and progressive, the leadership has made a very big effort to improve company culture. And what I'm recognizing now, to Claire's point, is that as a leader within Phoenix and within a company, I set an example for their attitudes and behaviors. And as leaders, we have to recognize that we do have the responsibility to build and create the culture within a company. And so, you know, it used to be that I only came out when I felt comfortable, but as the climate has changed, as I grow to recognize the example that I set as a leader, it's kind of a non-issue. It's when people say, oh yeah, I'd spent my weekend doing X, Y, and Z, and I would say, yeah, my wife does this and that. And so it's a part of getting to know your coworkers. And it's not just about coming out, but it's about building the trust, being open with your coworkers, and it really affects people's motivation, their collaborative spirit, and the commitment, not only to you but also to the company. So I think in general, it's something that if you're comfortable, because it does take quite a bit of effort to get over the fears that you have internally, especially when it's your career on the line, to do that and to be authentic in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the authenticity and also the connections that you create with others to be able to be yourself. I want to touch a little point about experiences of any form of discrimination, prejudice, or any of this at work that you have, experienced because of your LBGT plus identity. Have you had any of these experiences? I will throw this question to Andre. Has that been any of you?
So I thought I would kind of mention what seems like a very specific experience, but it may be a bit more general. So in my work, I do field work. So although I'm kind of based at the University of Michigan, which is a very liberal place, I find myself in rural Michigan all the time, or rural Texas, or in Guam or in Mexico or wherever I'm kind of looking for butterflies. So then I have to kind of recalibrate a little, or kind of be able to recognize the setting that I'm in and kind of evaluate to what extent do I kind of need certain types of presentations in different areas. And in my postdoc in Chicago, I was working with a graduate student who kind of looks like a white woman, but she has kind of several different identities. And between the two of us, we would kind of decide in a particular kind of setting, would it be best for kind of me to approach kind of a landowner or something to say, well, we'd like permission to do X, Y, Z to catch butterflies or something. Is it better for me to approach them, or is it better for her to approach them? Just because of how people will respond. And people did very much so respond differently to kind of who was asking the question. So, and I imagine that might be similar kind of in business settings whenever you're kind of meeting clients or something. I mean, I don't really know about that world exactly, but it has kind of made me realize that although kind of I've chosen the safe space of Michigan, I still have to kind of recognize that my identity affects my work.
Thank you for that. How about you, Melva? Have you experienced any of this?
So because I am all the minorities, like I'm Black, I'm female, I'm lesbian, I'm from Mississippi in tech, like it's hard when something that is obviously discriminatory or rude happens. It's hard to say it's because of X. You know, so for example, like, you know, I've had people say and do some ridiculous stuff. So for example, one of the professors that I worked for as an undergrad, and I should say my undergrad, you know, things might be very different now. It's been a long time, but at the time, it wasn't necessarily the norm for undergrads to be doing bench science, you know, outside of their classes. So freshman year, I went knocking on doors, and I ended up working for the first professor who said yes. And so that professor at some point got annoyed with me and called me into his office and said, you know, yeah, you've been working for me all these years, blah, blah, blah. But if you really want it to be of use to me, there are floors that need to be mopped and dishes that need to be washed. And that's after having worked for him for almost 3 years. So did he say that because I'm Black? Did he say that because I'm female? Did he say that because I'm gay? You know, like, you know, it's hard, you know. You know, I've had people question whether or not I belong somewhere. Like, you know, I go to a seminar and there are people like, well, this is only for, you know, MIT people. And I was like, noted. Like, you know, so I've had it, you know, just all kinds of crazy stuff happen. And I think if you try too hard to figure out why someone else is in that space, you'll drive yourself crazy. At least that's how I feel about it. You know, I try to do what I can to not put myself in places where I might, you know, encounter, you know, racism or homophobia or whatever. But, you know, you don't know until people, you know, act out in some way. So yeah, I think if you happen to be of multiple identities, which a lot of us are, and something crazy happens, unless they say, hey, you know, dyke or whatever they decide that they want to say to try to insult you, it's hard to say that that's why.
Thank you for sharing that, and how all intersectionality of your different identities really influence how people react to you, you know. I want to get a little more about this from Claire. Have you faced any of this before?
So I haven't, I can't point to any big incidents, like through, I think, kind of a combination of luck, privilege, and choosing places that advertise themselves as queer friendly. But what I do put up with is a whole lot of microaggressions that, like, a day without them is great, and a day with like 5, I go home furious. A lot of them refer to gender presentation more than sexuality. I'm single and have been most of the time, so it doesn't come up as often, but I do remember a time I was dating someone who identified as a woman, and I was talking about it at work, and it was kind of like, oh, a new relationship, right? So talking about that. And people got, let me be specific, my older male coworkers got a little too interested, if you know what I mean. Like, they didn't say anything super inappropriate or anything, but it felt like it couldn't just be a relationship. It was now something salacious, and it made me feel a little gross just to talk about the woman I was dating, and that sucked, and felt really creepy. The other one that I get a lot is gender checking. So especially, I had a buzz cut for about a year a while back, and it's happened a lot more then. Or if I just put on a ball cap for some reason, a snapback, all of a sudden people just gender me as male. But I remember specifically, I was in a bathroom at Google, and I was the women's bathroom, to be specific, because that's relevant to this. I was leaning over and washing my hands, and a woman came in and she started this dance, right? It's like she popped into the room, she sees me and she freezes, and she leans out to check the sign, and she leans back into the room to look at me, and she leans back out to check the sign, and she leans back in to look at me. And by that point, I'd like stood up towards her, and I guess she'd like seen that I had breasts or something, which obviously that's what defines womanness. But then she was fine and came into the bathroom, but like, stupid shit like that happens a lot. And I don't feel it's something that's really damage my career at any point, but it's a thing that I got to put up with that a lot of other people don't.
I want to thank everyone for what you share. I'm going to jump in more in the Q&A because we have like 10 minutes left. And so when I ask the question, you can chime in whatever you think about this. One of the questions we got was, do you feel like you have to work a little harder to compensate when you're being out? Or do you have to do extra work for that?
I can go. I feel that sometimes yes and sometimes no. It depends on the environment. I think, for example, if I'm at work, if anything, I'll tone it down, and I'll try to, I'll kind of gauge the room, so to speak, and be like, well, how friendly is the crowd in this room, and how bubbly can I be in their presence, versus like if I'm having bottomless brunch with a few friends and it's my boyfriend and two of our gay friends, then we'll all just be very gregarious and we'll let it loose, right? So I think as far as that is concerned, it really depends on where you are. Though I definitely do see, like, I think the question is kind of going to get this too. Definitely do see that there's a kind of an expectation, especially in like almost fully gay circles, to just kind of out gay one another and just be the loudest person in the room. I don't know what there is to be gained by playing into that. So, at the end of the day, it just goes back to authenticity. If that's how you genuinely feel you want to be, go for it. Do whatever, you feel makes you feel authentic, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. But I would say don't try to conform to, just like we shouldn't try to conform to straight society's expectations of us of being whatever, we also shouldn't try to conform to, LGBT society's expectations of us of being a particular kind of, good gay, bad gay, or whatever those weird terms are, right? I think that's kind of how I feel.
Anyone else have any input on this?
I was just thinking that I don't know if it has to do with being LGBT or of that sort of perspective, but I know that, perhaps ethnically, culturally, and also as a woman, I've always felt that I've had to work extra hard to be where I'm at, to be viewed with the same level of competency or experience as counterparts. And so, I've felt that way, but I don't know if it's necessarily been due to being lesbian, especially now that I feel like in some ways I do feel invisible. Whereas, earlier in my career, I also, in some ways, I passed as a boy. So, I also felt invisible in that way as well. But yeah, I don't know if it had to do with that aspect of myself, my identity.
Anyone else has any input on this? Okay, I can move to our next question. So when you were applying for jobs and all these components, did you research the company, whether it was LGBT friendly, or how has you done your job search for this?
So I'll kick off since other folks haven't unmuted. So I definitely will do things like look at the corporate equality index that HRC puts out. So they actually have a whole set of criteria that they use to say if the company has pro LGBTQ policies and things like that. Things like working on Glassdoor, other job or corporate websites, even just checking out their website to see, like, do they make it a point to represent diversity within their own either the website, in any documents and things that they're telling people about the company. And then the things like I talked about, the Fortune 50. So I think there are a lot of publications, and there is a lot of news available, especially in the age of Google, where you can do things. You can look for that type of information, and I think it is definitely good. I think the other thing that I would recommend is, use your network. And one of the benefits of being from MIT is to use your network. Look on LinkedIn, find people in the best source of information of how a company is if you can connect either with people that directly, that work there, or if any of your connections work there, it can connect you with someone.
Yeah, networking is definitely big. I can't say I've ever sat down and searched for like lists of queer-friendly companies. I kind of went the opposite direction in a way. Not that I looked for anti-queer companies, whatever. I got the job I have now through a recruiting booth at a conference called Lesbians Who Tech, which is an awesome, awesome computer science conference. I've been to a lot of conferences, and it's by far the most fun one I've ever been to. You don't have to be a lesbian to attend, they don't card. But I was looking for a new job, and I wasn't specifically like there to find a job, but I was at the tech fair there, right? The job fair, wandering around and talking to people. And I enjoy, those moments of immersion into the community where it combines with the career, right? Events like that and things like that are where you're going to make the connections, and people that are going to be at those places are going to be queer friendly, or they're going to be performative, but that's kind of a separate problem. So that's how this happened for me.
I have one last question that I just want to ask. Someone in the chat said, how do you honor those who came before you? So how do you pay respect to those that have been there before?
So I think the way the question is posed, it makes it sound like you're like kind of praying to a statue or something. But what I have experienced is, one excellent way to honor people is to listen to their stories. I have friends who are like in their 70s and their 80s, and listening to what they have to say about what they experienced, just trying to be themselves, in the world. It's a very different thing, to be out as queer or trans or whatever now versus, 40 years ago, let's say. And so I think taking time to listen to what people have to say is a great way to honor them. And it's a great way to, to have, to make new friends. If you'd asked me when I was 15 if I would have, friends who are like 70 years old, that would have seemed absurd to me, right? But realizing that people who have come before you are people too, and they have experiences to share and things that might be relevant to you.
Well, thank you for that. I think we're running out of time, and I just want to close down the panel. I want to thank all the panelists for being part of this and for all the insights. It was really great to hear your insights about your career and also how you approach these things. And also want to thank our audience for being part of this in the MIT Alumni Association and MIT BGLATA. Just want to say, be safe, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.